Hi, I'm Mike Dilk, and you're listening to the Relax Back UK show, the show that explores all kinds of health topics relevant to you, your family, and your friends. Each week, I talk to expert guests from a range of backgrounds to inform and entertain you. So please do join the Relax Back UK family and stay tuned. Hi, and thank you for joining me, Mike Dilk, on the Relax Back UK show this week. Now, I always enjoy talking to my guest this week, Professor Greg Whyte. We talk about challenges and pushing yourself out of your comfort zone and getting bodies and minds to achieve things which kind of might surprise us. Now, Greg's done this a lot with sport relief, including helping with Eddie Izzard and helping him to run 43 marathons in 52 days. Didn't all go to plan though, and the first marathon was not exactly what Greg expected.
He stopped for Sunday lunch. Yeah, he actually stopped for Sunday lunch.
Okay.
It was brilliant. Against advice, by the way.
We look at setting goals, having a vision, and striving for something realistic.
If, for example, Eddie had said to me, as many television production companies have asked me in the past, is could we make Eddie Izzard an Olympic champion? Well, to some extent, that is unrealistic for multiple reasons.
So please do stay with me for a fantastic chat with a wonderful expert. Thank you.
This show is cool.
Professor Greg Whyte does an awful lot. He's an Olympian, a sports academic, an author, trainer of comic relief participants and major endurance athlete. And even with that list, I kind of felt that I may have missed some things out. So first off, I apologised to Greg if I had indeed missed out anything important.
It sounded good to me, so yeah, I'll take it.
Well, I got to say, you're one of those people that when I talk to you or find out a bit more about you, I keep finding out something else and thinking, surely he doesn't do that as well.
Well, I'm a busy man. You know?
Yes, busy is good.
I don't like to sit down.
No, well, look, thanks for taking a few minutes to talk to me in your busy schedule.
Absolute pleasure, Mike.
What I want to chat about and bend your ear about is kind of the topic we've touched on a little bit before, but how we get our bodies and indeed our minds to achieve things that seem pretty much impossible to us. And I'm not just talking, great Ironmen or marathons. I want to talk about sort of, normal people as well, that actually for them, it might be a walk around the block or a jog for a couple of miles, anything really. And not sort of just stay with the physical things. I think a lot of what you do and talk about can be applied to academic things, maybe even playing a musical instrument, that sort of thing. I say we've touched on this before, but that was before I'd read your book, Achieve the Impossible, which I've now dipped into. So I feel a little bit more ready to ask you some of these questions. And actually, the thing that I came across, the first thing that really hit me when dipping into your book was this idea of a vision, and how that's a key part of the process. So really, I suppose my first question is, why is a vision got to be, why is it so important? Why is it such a key thing?
Well, it's an interesting one, Mike. And sort of going back to something you said earlier about, whatever that vision is, I think to some extent, the enormity of the challenge is somewhat irrelevant. I think what effectively we're talking about is a challenge is when we effectively challenging the status quo. So we're challenging our current position. Now, if that current position is sat on the sofa having never run before, then it actually could be, and in fact, if sat on the sofa, it could be walking around the block. Equally, it could be running around the block. If you're doing a little bit of jogging occasionally, it could be a 5K. If it's, as you've said, learning a musical instrument and you've never played a musical instrument before, then effectively what you're doing is you're challenging that status quo. Now, what's key to that is actually the initial vision. Is what is it that you want to achieve? And critical to that really is this idea that vision has to sort of has to create. We can call it a vision, we can call it a goal, But there are frameworks around which it should sit in order to make sure that we can achieve it. But I think the first and probably the most important point is the vision, and that is ensuring that what that vision is actually means something to you. I think an awful lot of people sort of enter into a personal challenge. They challenge their own status quo because they feel they should, because social pressure means that they should, that what they're trying to do is achieve something that everybody else is achieving. And that, I mean, the classics around that is often, people will say to me, "Oh, I want to run the London Marathon," and I say, "Well, do you enjoy running?" And they say, "No, I absolutely hate it." And you think, "Well, why are you doing that?" And they're doing that because that's what they perceive others will assume is successful if they are able to do it. And I think you've got to be very careful about challenging yourself based upon what you think others will think about it. It has to be an incredibly personal thing. Right. Why does that matter? Because it's what continues to drive you on as you go through it. So, we can chat later about what I call the central motivator, the primary reason why you're doing it. But the vision is absolutely crucial, but it's making sure it's the right vision. That's the key to it.
Yeah, okay. No, that makes perfect sense. That might be a good point to bring in someone who you tutored and helped in comic relief, because this particular one it was a while ago, but it's always amazed me. Eddie Izzard, right? Now, I haven't met him. You've met him, obviously. He comes across as a great guy. He's very funny, but he is the last person I would ever imagine to run 43 marathons in 51 days. So, yeah, but if you've got a vision, the point is, it's got to be realistic. And, well, obviously it was realistic because he did it, but it just the whole thing amazed me. Especially, I saw him after the first one. He ended up guzzling pints at the side of the road, didn't he? So,
he stopped for Sunday lunch. Yeah, he actually stopped for Sunday lunch.
Did he? Okay.
It was brilliant. Against advice, by the way.
Did you think it was realistic for him? Because maybe that's a slightly different question, but it's got to be realistic, hasn't it?
Well, I mean, again, as we said before, there's a framework around what we are talking about, and certainly, it being realistic, and it being realistic is sort of governed by a whole host of different things, really. I think, in general, I mean, you have to be very careful here. If, for example, Eddie had said to me, as many television production companies have asked me in the past, is could we make Eddie Izzard an Olympic champion? Well, to some extent, that is unrealistic for multiple reasons, and there are a whole host of reasons why that is unrealistic. Whereas actually, if you look back and think 43 marathons in 51 days, is that realistic? Well, given a whole host of other factors that I will weave into it, then what you can do is you can make it realistic. Now, that's not to say that you are guaranteeing success. You can very rarely do that. And actually, if you guarantee success, invariably it's not really a challenge. You're not changing the status quo if you can already foresee the outcome being positive. And so therefore, they are challenging, but they should definitely be realistic. And realistic comes in different ways. The physicality of it. Are you physically able to do it? Have you got the resources, not just the money, but actually the time in order to deliver on it? And then you think about things, is it timely? Are you planning it in such a way that you're giving yourself enough time to move from where you currently are to challenge that status quo to get to the point where you can be successful? Yeah. So making sure that and really what we're talking about now is actually we're sort of moving on to goals and goal setting, for which there are various different frameworks, but it's just making sure that you set those goals in such a way that they can be achieved, albeit they are challenging.
Right, with the confines of your life and everything else. Which
yeah.
I suppose this leads nicely onto the next thing I want to spend some time talking about, and that is indeed time. So if we're all short of time. We just outlined some of the things you get up to at the start of this chat. but you still do some, extraordinary things. As you do marathons and Ironman and all this. So you must put aside a lot of time for training, I would imagine. But my thought is, how can you, I suppose personally, but us, everyone else, possibly do that? I feel like there's no spare time in my life. So if I suddenly wanted to do an Ironman, or think about and do the track, it would be very difficult. I can't imagine how I would find the time.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting one, because actually the contemporary issue currently now is that, every time there is a crisis, the government say we haven't got any money, and then all of a sudden they find billions of pounds stuffed behind the sofa, in the cabinet.
They did that recently, didn't they? But they can print more. You see, we can't print more time.
But I think what's interesting about it is that, in that analogy, yes, they can print more, but actually that creates all sorts of problems, inflationary pressures, etc. Let's not talk politics. But but to some extent, what they do, and is what we can do is to some extent one of two things. Well, one is really about planning. And I think what we all think is that we're all time poor. We all think we haven't got enough time to do anything. And I would say, out of everything, probably the number one reason for people not challenging themselves is because they haven't got the time to do it. And I think actually, if you take a look at the day and you look at the structure of your day, and if you plan that day in a different way, what you will find is that you can create time. But it was a classic line from my dad, which used to infuriate me when I was a kid. Around all sorts of things, whether it was around revising for exams or whether it was around sport. And he always used to say to me, you can make time. And it used to infuriate me. It's like, well, of course you can't make time.
Yeah.
But to some extent, what he was alluding to was the fact that actually, if you have a plan, yeah. But it's so true. Look, we've all heard it. But it's about how you structure your time. And if you structure and you plan your time appropriately, actually what you can do is you can create more time, number one. And then I think number two is actually about prioritization. And it's about making sure that if you are going to challenge yourself, again, come back to this idea that it's a very personal challenge. The vision is personal. It means something to you. Ensuring that you actually bring everybody else with you. So if you've got family, you've obviously got work, etc. But making sure that they buy into your vision and your challenge as well is really important. So that they understand what that prioritization process is. And again, in doing that, what you would be able to do is carve out time in order to achieve it. So what we're not doing is making the day longer. We're not making every minute last an extra 10 seconds. All we're doing is structuring our time much better and prioritizing it to deliver at this particular moment of time on that goal.
Absolutely. No, I get that. Although I'm reading your book and this comment about making time, I have made a mistake, and because I uttered those words to my daughter.
So we all do it.
Recently I've been finding myself turning into my dad, but I also appear to be turning into your dad as well. So it's just like a double whammy.
It's everybody's dad. Everybody's dad has said it.
Yeah, it didn't go down well. But anyway, time. You've got to just get people on board and sort it out. There's not an easy way of doing that. Something else actually, which you mentioned in your book, which I just want to talk about, and how it potentially is it relevant to normal people. This wheel of success, because there are lots of things that you mentioned in this wheel of success. And I looked at that and thought, is that really relevant to, me, to regular people? Because, you talk about the team supporting you and all this kind of thing. I don't know, any thoughts about how normal people can go about this stuff?
No, I think what's really interesting is that what we do is that what we consume from the media, particularly, for example, in things like sport, is that we see the athlete, and then we see this team around them. We see we're currently watching, qualifiers in football. We're watching the World Cup at rugby, and we see the coach, And in fact, what we see is in rugby, we see an offensive coach, a defensive coach, we see the overall coach. Then we've got the physio and we've got the medic and we've got, and what we're led to believe is that's how elite sport is delivered. It is a team approach and everybody is contributing a little bit. But the only reason they're doing that, or one of the primary drivers for doing that, is they've got the money to do it. And so they can employ all of these people to create a team. And in business, you look at that and you think, well, the reason why that CEO is successful is because actually they've got senior management, they've got middle tier management, they've got everybody working for them, and they've got this big team that's driving it forward. But I think, and so to that end, we're sort of led to believe that actually it's somebody else who's got this team. But actually, we've all got a team. Now, the size of that team may well change, but all of us, I mean, the one thing that I always say is, look, nothing great is ever achieved alone. Nothing. And often when you look at people, you think, oh my God, they're amazing. But actually, sat behind them is a team of people. And that team, it can be a variable size and variable composition. So, as we've already said, within this conversation, actually family is incredibly important. Probably the most important part of my team is the family, is my wife and my children. And my broader family, to ensure that actually I have the support that is necessary in order to do what I am doing, the challenge, to ensure that they're along with it. Because actually, if you get the team wrong and the team aren't supporting you, then they become a significant barrier to success. And so making sure that you have those conversations early, making sure that everybody is buying into it, making sure everybody understands what not only what you're trying to take on, but actually what is required to create success. In doing that, what you do is you create the right team who are going to support you in that process. And also the fact is that you create a team at all, that you've actually got a team. And that, and generally that can broaden depending upon what you need and what your resources are. But the team is absolutely fundamental to the delivery of success. Right. But it's not just about having a team. It's making sure that obviously you've selected that team in the sense of your family, but more broadly, you select the right team. Then what you've got to do is make sure that team functions appropriately. So that's making sure that the communication across that team, making sure everybody is on the same page, making sure everybody understands what their role is, how they can optimize that role. And so, again, it's one of those things that the onus is on you as the challenger. It's your vision. You're the one at the end of the day who will stand on the podium, or who will, see business success or whatever it is. But making sure that the rest of the team are within that. Because it's your challenge, you've got to do the work to make sure that team works and is successful. And I think, sadly, a lot of people just assume that, I'm going to run the London Marathon. Everybody's bought into it. I don't need to tell them what I'm doing. And I'll just ad hoc, ask for things as we go along. Sure. Planning. It doesn't work without planning.
Actually, while you were talking just then, but giving the example of, a rugby team with all these different coaches, etc., like that's today. I was thinking, I wonder what your team was when you were an Olympian. I suspect it was fairly minimal because it was, it was just a different time, wasn't it?
Well, I'm an old man. Is that what you're saying?
Well, yeah, I think you're pretty much a similar age to me.
No, but it's interesting because I often regale this story, when talking to people, because actually, certainly for my kids, and for kids of today, and then also, to some extent, we've got sort of rose-coloured spectacles on, don't we? We sort of look back and we assume that elite sport was always the same. Well, when I competed, there was no money. And in fact, there was, certainly in the early part of my career, it was in complete amateur ethics. So you weren't allowed to earn any money from sport. That has changed significantof since that time. But the one thing that did change, and I was the chair of the British Olympic Association Athletes Commission. So I sort of chaired the group that looked after all British Olympic athletes from 97 to 2000. And it was in 98 that lottery funding came in. And that lottery funding utterly transformed the landscape. Because you're right. I mean, prior to that, I had individual coaches that I had to pay for individually, because I was a modern pentathlete, obviously, so 5 events, different coaches. And And it was very late in my career, prior to retirement, that sports science and sports medicine actually became a thing. Right. So, the idea of having a physiologist, a nutritionist, and a psychologist, was really new. But since that time, an athlete now can be surrounded by anything up to around about 15 specialists as part of their team. From nutrition, biomechanics, physiologists, psychologists, strength and conditioning specialists, coaches, the list goes on. And so it very much has changed dramatically. But people often say, is that the reason why performances have improved? Yes, in part it is. But I think what's actually changed more than anything else within elite sport is actually the professionalization of sport, which enables the time. So when I was an athlete, because there was no money, you either worked or you studied. Right. You had to do something. I studied because I've always tried to avoid work as best I can, but yeah. So whereas now, my recovery was going to a lecture. Right. Whereas now athletes they've got 3 hours off between sessions, and so they can optimize that recovery, and so therefore ensure that the next session is of the highest quality. Yeah. So it has changed dramatically. Money has made the difference to that. But I think, again, what money has done, as well as increased the size of the team, what it's also done is it's professionalized the approach. So things like, as we've already spoken about, things like planning, prioritization, structure has improved dramatically. And that is what has led to enhanced performance.
Yeah. But having said all that, you can plan, you can find time without the money. Everybody can do it to some extent. So if you're listening to this and thinking, oh God, I've got no chance, you have every chance. Don't worry
Absolutely.
about it. Crack on with it.
You just got to be, and you've got to be inventive, I think, Mike, sometimes, and don't be lured into this idea that, from a sporting challenge perspective, the one thing that I say to most people is, look, when it comes to things like equipment, you can spend as much money as you like on equipment. And sadly, an awful lot of people who've got the money think that buying expensive equipment means they'll go faster or they'll go longer, and it simply is not the case. Right. So what you've got to be savvy about where you spend the money, and you can spend an awful lot less money for the same outcome, because what you're doing is you're and again, it's this idea of actually doing the work rather than effectively taking the shortcut, and that is going onto a chat room and saying, I'm buying a new bike, what's the best one to buy? Somebody comes up with a particular bike that's going to cost you 15 grand. And say, oh, okay, well, I'll just do that if you've got that sort of money. Whereas actually, you could spend 500 quid on a bike and do just as well. Yeah. And in fact, probably do better, psychologically do a lot better, that's for sure. So I think you've got to put the work in. It's your responsibility. You have a responsibility to put the work in across the board. All
right. Very good. Let's just move on to something slightly different. Now, I quite often ask my guests impossible questions. So this might be going into the area of impossible questions. So apologies for that. I've spoken about similar sorts of topics with a brain surgeon, actually, Dr. Rahul Jandal. And I really enjoyed talking to him. And he spent a lot of time talking about how the brain works. It can help people to sort of ignore pain or forget pain or get the rewards from doing activity. I think he spoke about the brain as this sort of internal pharmacy, that sort of thing. But it got me wondering, and I don't think there's a real right answer to this, is that some people are taller, and so they have an advantage in basketball because they're just built differently. Do you think some, and some people are cleverer? They just are, although they can work at that. Do you think there might be sort of brain advantages that some athletes just have because they make these sort of brain chemicals that reward exercise or help them to sort of go a bit faster or ignore the fact it's hurting a bit more? Some people just are better at this stuff, aren't they? Or are they? What's the difference?
Well, I mean, first off, Rahul Jandal, Rahul's a very close friend of mine, and we, interesting enough, we talk about this topic regularly. And really, what the question boils down to is the age-old question of nature versus nurture. So are great athletes born, or are they made? And the bottom line is that it is a combination of both. What you are born with really matters. So you're right, but particularly in certain sports. So if you want to be a defensive linesman in American football, you've got to be a monster. And so therefore, if you are 5'2", you're going to struggle at doing that. But I think what matters there, though, and this is this issue that has developed over time, and certainly more recently, this idea of talent identification. And that talent identification process really is about actually predicting and projecting where an individual is going to go. So equally, if your projected maximum height is 6'4", you're unlikely to make a great gymnast. Because gymnasts have a particular somatotype, a particular body type, and so every sport has a particular body type. The question is, there are some things within that body type that you really can't change, or the effect, certainly naturally you can't change. And so therefore there is an element of nature to it. But for me, by far the most important aspect is the nurture, is the making of an athlete. And I think what we have to be really careful of is to assume that is one dimensional, where actually what it is, it's what I always describe it as is what I call the perfect storm that is required. And it is so it's biological, it's biopsychosocial, economic. So because actually, all of these things matter. So what's your biology? That obviously matters. What's your psychology? That obviously matters. What is your sociology? Where do you live? A great example of that, I always talk about someone like Usain Bolt, who was born in Kingston, Jamaica. Now, if he was born in Kingston, southwest London, it is unlikely that he would have been the fastest man ever to run on this planet, because he'd have grown up in a country that is utterly obsessed with football. And so as a kid and as a teenager at school, he'd have been the fastest kid on that pitch, and he'd have been selected for football, and he'd have been farmed into football. And he could have been, I know he loves football. He could have been a professional footballer. But in Kingston, Jamaica, every kid in Jamaica wants to be a sprinter, because there is a culture of sprinting. Now, add on top of that, what they've also got is the facilities. They've got tracks, and so therefore they've got the facilities to train. Add on top of that, they've got competition. Every kid wants to do it, and so you've got this huge, broad base of competition. So therefore, in order to win the national schools in Jamaica, you are probably close to, if not winning World Junior Championships, just to win their national championships. And so that this idea of the pyramid into elite is very much based on how big that base of athletes are. Add on top of that, they've got great coaches. And so what you've got is this societal, this social perfect storm in order to make Usain Bolt into a great sprinter. It doesn't mean he will be a great sprinter, because he also needs the biological and the psychological. And then, of course, the economic really matters as well, because we've spoken about that, the impact of money on it. So it's a really complex picture. And I think that there is a real tendency to lean on the nature piece as an excuse for why certain individuals or certain nationalities are good, are the best at a certain sport. And whereas I think actually what matters far more is the nurture aspect of it, and it's getting that nurture aspect right, which means that with the right nature, because you could be, Dave Bedford, you and I probably remember, was the world 10,000 meter record holder. And there was a great interview he did with Athletics Weekly at the time, when he'd just broken the world record, and he was in a pub. And the interviewer said to him, "What's it like to be the best 10,000 meter runner in the world?" And he said, "Take a look around the pub." He said, "Because I might not be the best 10,000 meter runner in this pub, never mind the world. The only difference is that I had a talent and I used that to achieve what I have achieved. So, for me, the nature bit is one. It's an important part, but it's a small part of what is actually required to make elite.
Yeah, interesting. So I can just tell a small personal story in that. So I've got a son at age 13. And when I was at school, all I ever did was play rugby. All right, I wasn't that great. I played schoolboy rugby, and I suggested him a few times. Would you like to try rugby? Hates it. He does ballet, and actually, he's in better physical shape than I ever was at age 13. It really is good. It's good for him. But I'm sure, and I don't try and stop him doing ballet and play rugby instead, because that would be a disaster. You know, you have to go with the way you have you want to go, and you have some talent. So all those people in the pub sorry, go on.
Yeah, but it's true, and I think that's probably the most important thing about that story is that, and this is important for everybody, and that is, look, do what you love. And I think that and it's that sort of trite saying about work. Like, if you do what you love, you never work a day in your life. And that's true about sport as well. And I think the big problem that I see on far too regular a basis is parents living vicariously through their children's lives and forcing their kids to do things that they want them to do. And you see that in certain sports more often, but I see it across the board, where what you realize is that the child is being pushed to the dream of their parent. Well, it will always end in failure, because as soon as that child gets to a point where they make their own choice, they're gone. And they might have been a great junior athlete. They might be great as a junior, but they never make it as a senior athlete. So the moral of that story is, do what you love, and if you do that, that's absolutely the right starting point.
Very good. Let's just for a moment bring it back to some of the things that you love. Now, I know you're still doing incredible events. I saw a film just earlier this morning about you doing the Norseman. Which is, well, just describe what the Norseman is. It's almost unbelievable.
It's lunacy, really. But they call it the toughest triathlon on the planet, and it is, for people who know what triathlon is. Obviously, it's a swim, bike, run. At the end of that distance spectrum is what they call Ironman or long distance, and the Norseman is that in terms of distance. And so it's a 2.5 mile swim, 112-mile bike, and a marathon run, back to back, no recovery. But what they do at the Norseman is from the very beginning, you jump off the back of a ferry at 5 o'clock in the morning. You swim in the pitch black along a fjord for 2.5 miles. When you get out on the bike, you effectively climb into the Alps in Norway. Who knew Norway was so mountainous? But it really is. For 112 miles. And then on the run, the marathon, you effectively start off on the flat. And then what you do is you go from sea level to the top of a mountain, which is 1,800 meters in altitude. So it's lunacy, frankly. It's I guess to some extent in that sort of triathlon sphere, it's probably the one thing that people really dream of doing, because it is the toughest on the planet.
So what I'm keen to ask is, in your throughout your sporting career, you have nothing left to prove at all. You really don't. Yet you still keep doing this stuff. So this, well, I was going to say, what's wrong with you? I didn't mean that. What on earth?
No, that's right. That's right.
What keeps you going?
That's what my wife says.
What did you tell her?
I think everything sort of brings us back to this original point of of the vision and the love, is that actually it is others. Well, I've probably described it as purgatory before. I mean, and it's. I think what's interesting about these things is often what we do is we view it at the end product. So going back to our conversation about the World Cup rugby. What we're doing at the moment is we're watching, 22, 15 on the pitch of the country's greatest rugby players. What we haven't seen is the 15 years it's taken them to get to that point, and the amount of blood, sweat, and tears that they have done. Overcoming injury, incredibly hard work. And years and years of dedication to the sport. And so I think, to some extent, we see the glamour, bit, and I think a lot of people actually assume that well, do you know what? That's the bit I want. I want the glamour bit. But you can't have the glamour without having the bit that goes before it. And I think actually it's the bit that goes before it, which is the most difficult part. People talk about, the stress and the anxiety of competition. Well, that's the best bit, because that's the reward for all of that work that you put in. And so reflecting on that positively, I think is important. But for me, I think it's actually about that. I love it. I enjoy it. I enjoy the misery of training. And I think to some extent there is obsession's a difficult word, but certainly it's part of what I do. And when I don't do it, my mental health and emotional health is never as good. Right. So there is a health aspect to why I do it, albeit other people would look at it and think that it's got to be unhealthy to do that.
Right. Interesting. Okay, we just touched on the pain of things. Very quickly, I just want to ask you a question about another extreme endurance athlete that I've read about recently. And actually, I've spoken to him on this show, Sean Conway. He recently finished 105 triathlons in 105 days. This is approaching kind of the end, isn't it? It can't get any more endurance. That's got to be it, hasn't it? End of story.
We always think that. Sean is a good friend of mine, actually, and a very interesting character. I think it's interesting. Sean has this saying about the first, the furthest, or the fastest is what he's always trying to be. Yeah. What he was following a challenge that a chap, I think it was the Iron Cowboy, had set, and I'm sure at that time they thought that was unbreakable, unbeatable. And so I think, to some extent, what we do through life is we reset what is possible. And I think what can we take from that? I think, as a non-triathlete, a non-exerciser, you could take a look at that and think, well, that's got nothing to do with me. But I think actually what it's about is actually about challenging yourself. It's exactly what we started the conversation with in terms of this challenging the status quo. And I think, is it possible? Well, nothing stays still. I remember when you think, Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile in 1954. And at that time, the pervading belief was that if a man ran below 4 minutes, they would die. Well, now men and women run below 4 minutes, and they run significantly below 4 minutes. And that world record is constantly being broken. The interesting point about what you say, and this is something that I have published on quite a bit, and that is about, are we reaching the limits of human performance? And I certainly think that in terms of things like speed, we're starting to reach the limits. So when it comes to strength and speed, but I think when it comes to distance, or as we saw with Sean in his 105 triathlons, is I think it's what the human is capable of is truly astonishing. And I think where we are, we're on this journey of demonstrating what that is. And it will continue for people who are interested in breaking those type of records. Yeah. I think that into the future, there will always be people who will want to break those records.
Yeah, interesting. And it appears I mainly interview friends of yours. I hadn't realised that.
Yeah, that's right.
Perhaps to finish, we just bring it back again to sort of everyday people, because that's how we started off a little bit. So if someone is, maybe sitting on their sofa listening to this and thinking, actually, I really need to just set myself a bit of a target, give them just one to finish, a bit of a nugget or a bit of a push that they need to just think about doing something that would be, good for them, sensible for them, or fun for them.
Well, I think honestly, the most important thing, as we've said it before, is that do something that is personal to you. Do something that you love. And I think particularly if you're starting out on that, I mean, I think, we can migrate and start to do other things and challenge ourselves in other ways. But I think the first thing that you should think about is that you don't, if it's a physical challenge, you don't have to do couch to 5K. It's not the rite of passage into physical activity. Whereas actually, if running is what you would love to do, and you live in a beautiful area and you'd like to explore it more, and there are lots of good reasons why you want to run, and actually couch to 5K, great way to do it. And I think the great thing about those type of programs, the couch to 5K, for example, is a really good example of how it should be done in terms of this progressive increase. So that actually you go slightly longer and slightly longer. And what you're not doing is suddenly going from the couch trying to run a 5K. It's going to take a period of time to get to that point. And what you do is you give your body time to adapt to it. So the nature of the challenge is very similar. But I think what you should do is actually pick something that you love. And to my mind, I think one of the great things about picking something you love is you may never have done it before. And actually, if the higher the skill level of it, you get this thing called mastery, is that as you start to get good at it, that actually becomes incredibly motivating. As you get better and better, it becomes incredibly motivating. So doing something you've never done before is actually not a bad idea, but do something that's slightly technical. So for me, for example, swimming. If you can't swim, learning to swim is empowering, and it's a really great challenge, because as you get better and better, that creates more and more motivation, and you start to love it more and more. But equally, things like actually learning an instrument, learning to play the piano is a great way to do that, particularly for mental and emotional health. Dance is a wonderful way to start off. So I think if you are at the start of your journey, you've never done anything like it before, the absolute most important thing is do something that you are going to love. And in doing that, it will mean you keep doing it.
Yeah. All right. That sounds like perfect advice to finish on. So, Greg, look, thank you very much indeed for chatting. I know you're a very busy guy and you got to run off now, so I really do appreciate the time.
Always a pleasure, Mike, and I thoroughly enjoy our chats.
Many thanks to my guest on the show this week, and that was Professor Greg Whyte. And of course, a big thank you to you for listening, and have a healthy week. Until next week.
Thanks for listening to the Relax Back UK show. Join me, Mike Dilk, again next week for more fascinating interviews and chat. If you're listening to the podcast version, please subscribe, like, and share it with your family and friends. And have a healthy week. Until next week.